All right, we are live. Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you're tuning out in the world. Welcome to Together Tuesdays here on the Elevating Conversation show. My name is Zipporah Kingsbury from ZipporahIntimacy.com, and I help high achieving adults to leverage emotional intelligence and body mind awareness so they can feel safe, seen, and confident in their life. Today, I'm excited for our Tuesdays because we get to have special guests, some phenomenal people. And today, I'm super excited. We're going to go off and dive into an organic conversation very soon with our special guest, Jenny White. She is here with us all the way from the UK, but she is in the UK because we are virtual. Yeah. So Jenny is a relationship coach, psychotherapist. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And we met through a shared community, but I just love her work around boundaries, her work around relationships, and really about talking about the things we don't talk about. And that's what I'm most excited about our conversation today, because I love talking about the unspeakable. And I have a feeling we're going to get into stuff today. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Jenny. Jenny, tell us what you do. Tell us more about you and our audience.
Right. So my name is Jenny White, psychological therapist and relationship coach. I'm based in the UK. I done relationship coaching because my background is actually also working with people who suffered from substance misuse. So before, that sounds maybe really far off. People think, how did you get to relationship coaching or being a relationship therapist because of substance misuse? You deal also with their families. You deal also with a lot of people with codependency. And of course, I had more and more people coming up and say, I have a problem with my relationship. Can you help me? And I came then across standard and boundary setting is off. And lately also that a lot of women don't dive into their femininity anymore. It's almost like deleted. It's really, really, really interesting. I found that very fascinating. So and in 2017, I went self-employed, founded my Strong Heart Awakening business. So it's my brand. And then my Strong Heart Awakening Academy. So so I fell a little bit into it. I let that always grow organically because I believe in that. That's how it happened.
Wow. Yeah. So check her out, Strong Heart Awakening. I'm taking notes here while you're talking. It helps me. I will own that for me to remember everything. So check it out, Strong Heart Awakening. We will have links everywhere so you can find Jenny. Jenny, I would love to just briefly share a little bit about that overlap of addiction and boundaries, because I know it, but I want to share a little more for our audience of that link and that overlap, please.
Yeah, we always think that people who suffer from substance misuse or have problems with addiction, that they are actually the ones who are pushing our boundaries. But a lot of times they have problems with setting boundaries too. And that's the reason why they misuse maybe substances, because they feel they can't talk, speak up, they are traumatized. I mean, Gabor Mate done some fantastic, that is doing some fantastic work on that. I absolutely adore him. You come across with boundary setting, it's a structure. With standard setting. So when they came through the doors and tried to get help, what I find, they were yearning for structure because they didn't know how to create it, or they lost it. They maybe had structure, now they lost it. And they didn't know how to build their life up again. And that's totally fascinating. So I came then across standard and boundary setting because as a recovery coach, you have to make sure you hold that boundary. And that's standard because that's healing. And they sometimes push, of course, every angle possible. They can push boundaries because they're scared. They don't know how to change. So I realized you can actually build up fantastic, deep, meaningful relationships, and in that form, therapeutic relationships, if you hold up your boundaries, if you hold up your standards, because they appreciate that. And a lot of addicts or people who suffer from substance misuse, they actually later on, when they healed from that, when they recovered, they will come to you and will say to you, I have so much respect. You were the only person who told me no. You were the only person who hold that structure and gave me that safety. And they were yearning for it. And it's powerful. And it's not only they yearn for it, other people, relationships yearn for it. It makes you so much more attractive too.
Yeah, it is. It is. Boundaries are super sexy.
They are.
I have a terminology that, boundaries are an act of love. And I use that a lot. And I love what you shared about the safety piece. And I'm going to share a story. It's not human based, it's horse based, but it's very similar. Horses move in herds. And I do natural horsemanship work, and I do it because it mirrors the relationship work that I do. But if I am not clear and centered in who I am, which is part of having my boundaries, if I'm working with the head of the herd, they're not going to feel safe with me. And so that means they're going to push my boundaries even unaware, because they're not feeling safe. They need direction. And so, it's the same thing as humans. Is if we're in a relationship with somebody, whether that be a parent, a child, a partner or lover, is by knowing our boundaries, in my view, it's showing that, one, we know ourselves and we're setting the perimeter to where we are psychologically, emotionally, energetically, so that other person knows the perimeters of where we can interact, right? And that creates the safety. That person is knowing me, or knowing you. And now it's like, okay, this is the field we get to play on. And if we don't know the field, if we don't know the rules of the game, we're going to be running to the wrong post, the wrong side of the field. And it's going to be very confusing. And I just, it's going to feel very unsafe. And as addiction, and we'll switch over in a moment, but just tapping into that, like, seeing addiction as filling a void, for those missing components from our child or from our life, and being able to identify what are those voids that we're all trying to fill, because addiction or not, like, we're all addicted to something in some sense, right? Is what is that void, like our particular void that we continually are trying to fill through, certain relationship habits, grasping onto someone else to fill our needs. I'd love to just hand that over to you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I found it fascinating, because over here, we sent actually people to a rehabilitation unit where they had horse therapy. They're connected with horses. Yeah. It's unbelievable. As you mentioned that, it's like, wow. And they had such an impact on it. So it's really, really amazing. And it's also, of course we fill the void. And often in relationships, or in this world, the relationship with us, we try to survive. If we come back to the topic of addiction, in addiction, for example, I think these people try to survive something really traumatic, and they try to numb themselves so they can carry on living. It's of course dangerous, because you are numbing something what needs to be healed, because we don't learn to sit with negative emotion. If you take that back to a relationship, how often do we enter relationships and we maybe hit an obstacle and we do the runner? Or we don't know how to communicate our standards and our boundaries in the first place. So we are with a person we shouldn't be, because we think, we will suss it out somewhere down the line. So instead of being picky how we enter relationships, we're not. So we are not checking, we are morphing them into something they are not. And instead of being picky, we just enter this relationship, have an idea of what this person might be, and then they don't match actually the image in our head. So how dare they not match the image in our head, right? So it's really, there are so many crossovers. It's all a relationship with yourself. How do you deal with yourself? Because you will choose your partners, what you think you deserve, how you set your standards, and how you set your boundaries.
I love that. Can you repeat that? Say that again. So can you repeat that for our audience? I love that.
So the way you have a relationship with yourself will have a massive impact on how you choose your partners. how often do we have that, Zipporah, that people are out there and say, I want to have a partner who makes me happy? No. If you are not happy now, they can't make you happy. You put so much pressure onto them. And I do appreciate if people say, Jen, I've gone from one toxic relationship to another. Now I try to filter people out. Now I become awkward in the dating scene, on the dating scene. And now I will tell them maybe, well, make sure you show me that you are worthy. So I become really bitter in my energy. And when I do this, I might lose a really good relationship. So I have to work on my self-worth and happiness before I go and enter a relationship. If you look for a relationship and you say they have to make me happy, don't. Have a look where that comes from. Become more whole. Of course, don't be perfect. Don't overthink and say, I can't have any relationship until I'm perfect. We always see our imperfections in relationships anyway. We do.
Yes. Amen. Yes, we do. You know, I look at spirit as relationships as being one of the highest form of spiritual practices, right? Because of that. And again, I'm taking notes because there were so many points you hit on. And I love the knowing our values before we get into a relationship. I had a client who I remember he came to me, he was having erectile dysfunctions. He started dating and he had this checklist of what his partner needed to have, like this really strong checklist. Wow. He was very much running his life by it. And when we started working together, his biggest thing was how scared he was of being vulnerable, and which was impacting his sex life, which was impacting like having real connection, because he was putting so much on the other person. And so when he was able to finally like do that inner work and work with old trauma loops and start to repattern his nervous system and reframe his experiences, you know, by knowing himself, knowing his values, being able to be more vulnerable, people started trusting him more. People started leaning more into him. And so that's why I just love how you're just like, come into yourself, know yourself. And that brings us to needs, because you mentioned that. And I just want to kind of bounce off of that a bit, is I work a lot with needs. Like we talk about like identifying your feelings and needs, knowing them so you can, part of being vulnerable, right? And part of setting boundaries is knowing what you're feeling and what you're needing without projecting that onto your partner. So the big, like question mark often, which is so funny. People are like, well, if I have a need now and I know my need, isn't that person supposed to meet my need? And I'm just like, well, that's the funny part, kind of, if you want to laugh at it. It's no, your partner's not responsible for meeting your need. But if you know your needs, so here's the thing, if you know your needs and you're in a relationship where there's joy, like this shared joy, like, oh my God, like I love seeing my partner's needs fulfilled, right? And so there's that energy because it's a shared yes. Then your needs might be met by your partner and in other places out of joy. But when it becomes obligation, that to me is when we get into the unhealthy zone, because I don't believe, at least in my work, is, you know, your partner is responsible, obligatory to meet your needs if it's not this full body yes from both of you.
Absolutely. If you have a look, what I find very interesting, and a lot of relationship coaches lately talk also about that. So, for example, we can go into a relationship and be committed, but do we show devotion? That means, do we really care about somebody's heart? So do we treat them like we would treat us? And then you have to think about that. How do you treat yourself? If I'm not good to myself, how can I treat somebody else? So then I can't fulfill somebody's need. So it's totally different when somebody comes to me and said, you need to fulfill my need. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Instead of saying, open your heart. Especially women can't be vulnerable lately. I find that. Going to the partner and saying, look, this is what I really need. This is how I feel. So they're not communicating that. It's really fascinating me. So of course, we can't often when we come with a very harsh energy and we're saying, I need this because I went through so many crappy relationships. And if I'm not getting this in a relationship, you're the same like everybody else. How much do you want to give this person then what they need? It's like a energy. It's like a dance, isn't it? We really have forgotten how to set standards and how to set boundaries. It becomes often like really army like, almost like, you have to do this. If you're not doing it, then I'm out of the door. So it's like really threatening. That's the reason why nobody talks about standards and boundaries in the first place, because they seem to be unsexy, which they are not. It's how you actually put them out.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to just repeat that about the boundaries. It's not that setting boundaries or talking about your needs and feelings is about demanding. And what Jenny's talking about is the energy that you're putting into it. It could be your tone and your tempo of your voice. It could literally be the how your body's feeling. Because if you're feeling constricted, talking about your feelings and needs, that automatically is going to hit a defense wall. So what Jenny and I here are speaking about is gathering a skill set and tools where you can actually talk about like, wow, like I'm recognizing like I'm feeling sad and I'm feeling disappointed because I was noticing I wanted more attention. And while you gave me your way of doing it, your way of, I noticed it didn't meet the way I wanted to. So when we can have a dialogue like that, to me, like it starts to open up. Okay, well, tell me more. And wow, yeah, this is how I share love, and tell me more how you receive that, right? And so if we are demanding something, we're never going to get the outcome. And I think that's the myth that people think we have to fight for what we want. We have to fight for our needs, but it's the opposite. If you actually can have these vulnerable conversations, like the modeling I just gave, is you are actually now closer to getting the outcome you want.
Yeah, because it's like, somebody wants to give you that because they want you in their life. And it's the communication tool. Of course, men might be a little bit more direct. They should be. That's okay, but they still can be vulnerable. But their vulnerability shows differently because often it's also how you present vulnerability. If I'm coming there and I'm saying, I'm so vulnerable, I can't deal with people who are, for example, you are going out with boys and I don't like it because my past partner went out with the boys and every time when he went out, I knew he was cheating. And now I tell my partner, that's my vulnerability, I'm scared, and I expect them now to not go out to please me. But that's not the issue. The issue is you put now a trust issue on top of your partner. And you need to solve that. So that's not, to then say to your partner, you have not the freedom to go out and meet people. That's not realistic. So it's really interesting. So a man should really then be direct and say, look, babe, or whatever you call each other, you need to trust me. Where is that coming from? That is not healthy. So how we set that. And men, usually they come up with their vulnerable stuff when they already found a solution or a pathway to it, which is great, which makes us actually feel safe, which I like. So men are actually really, and please correct me, they are very vulnerable in relationships. They bring vulnerability only across a little bit different. Right.
They do. And I think, I believe it is part inner work, like inner process, but also part skill. And I'm blessed, like, at least in my personal life, I have a lot of people with a lot of skill. But yeah, men, they show vulnerability different. Often the masculine does like to, like acts of service, taking care of. And I want to share a story because it'll just tag off of what you were sharing about the differences with men or the masculine. I'm just going to say the masculine in general. So I had a friend and we were spending some time together, and they their thing was acts of service. They were very much in that type. That was their love language. And if they weren't doing that, they just felt worthless, right? And so there are two things there. Their inner work was addressing, where that programming started. Like who taught them that their self-worth meant they had to constantly do for someone, because that to me can be limiting. So that's for them to work on. But the amazing outcome of that was you can either get triggered. I could have either got triggered because I'm a very independent woman. And, so for those of you listening, you might have some women here or feminine who just like, I like to do things for myself. And I like people caring for me, but sometimes it can be overbearing. So, it was me stepping back and witnessing. And I asked him, I said, what do you feel when you're doing something for someone? And then he started going off this list. Well, I feel worthy. I feel like, I'm valuable. I feel he just went on. And I, for me to sit back and say, oh my God, this feels really good for him. This is maybe his part of his being vulnerable. This is part of his sharing. So I had a choice of staying reactive and saying, you know what, I want to be independent and I don't need all of this. Or I could have stepped into, for me, this is again, just my personal story, is into a place of compassion and be like, well, I'm going to give him the space to do all of this today because I know how good it makes him feel. And so I love the idea of unpacking things like the trust. You mentioned trust. Don't go out with your friends. That triggers trust. It's the same thing. Like if we can unpack where those stories are coming from and do it together, but we can't do it together unless we're willing to be vulnerable and talk about it. And I can just keep going on. I have so many things bouncing off in my head. So let's talk about boundaries again. Just dive deeper into that. There's a fine line between using boundaries as a way to control somebody or as a way to open up and know somebody. And this goes off of what you're talking about trusting your man going out with other men. And so if we are sharing boundaries, setting boundaries as a place to feel safe for the moment, but to do the work, what is this inner work I have to do? Where is this trust stuff coming from? Where is that wounding? What do I have to work with? Talking to my partner, that to me is a boundary that expands, because boundaries are permeable, right? They're not solid. But if I'm setting a boundary and saying, nope, can't go out because it doesn't make me feel good, that's a solid wall. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that fine line with boundaries, because there is a healthy and unhealthy way of creating boundaries.
Absolutely. For me, so standard and boundaries. So when I talk to my people, I always say there is a difference, because often people think boundaries are standards. So you have a standard. Standard is, for example, always positive. So don't put it in the negative. It's like, I want to have somebody who's reliable. How would that show? I want to have somebody who shows me love. Maybe you need somebody who's cuddly, right? You need that. Maybe that's a love language you need, that you can't deal with somebody who can't cuddle you. Yeah. There are people out there. So what standards in a relationship do you want to see? How do you know you see them? And then how can they be violated? And then a boundary comes into place. A boundary is actually protecting your standard. So now we have a look at the standard setting. Like, for example, I want to trust my man. Yeah. And now you think the violation is he goes out with friends. That automatically means that he will violate your standard in you can't trust him because he might cheat. So now you put an unhealthy boundary in a way where you say, okay, you're not going out because you created a scenario in your head. So of course, boundaries are never like, you're never always right. So they're negotiable. And the question is, how much do you want to negotiate about that? Of course, if you don't feel well, if you sit there at home and think, oh God, he's out, I don't know what to do. This is not good. I can't sit with it. It's like getting help. And that's the reason why we come into place. Right? So it's like, really, where's that coming from? Why can't you trust them? Because often the cases, it's not that we don't trust them. It's you don't trust yourself that you can deal with this. If they really cheat, can you really walk away? It hurts like hell. Yeah. But we can't create a deep, meaningful relationship and trying to control somebody with a boundary. If you feel you need to control behavior because you think you can't trust them, that's not a boundary. That's a trust issue. And then we have to have a look where that comes from, because then you don't trust actually yourself to walk away and be able to deal with it, even though you wished this person would be different. Can happen. It can happen. We don't know, of course.
So I can talk to you all day. You're coming back on our show. I love this. So if you would have something you would leave our audience with today, something that they can do, like I'm loving you keep redirecting, come back into yourself, know your standards, know your values, know that when those get tripped up, that's where those strong boundaries come out because you're feeling unsafe. What would you want to leave our audience with today? A takeaway or something to do? And
so for me, it's always very important. What do you want to see in a relationship? These are your standards. And then also have a think about that. What are you scared of? So all the past relationships you had, maybe write them down and write them down if there are similarities and if there are maybe trigger points. And if there are similarities, if you've been rejected for, if boundaries have been overstepped, then maybe come and seek somebody advice and talk about that. It's so helpful. I've done that in the past. What is it? Why do I have always the same type? Why can't I set standards? Where's that coming from? What do you want? And why can't you get what you want? So have a look at your past relationships. Go through them. Write down how you met, how you bonded, how you set standards and boundaries, and how you ended up with them. It's it opens your mind and your eyes so much. It's unbelievable because we sometimes don't see it if we don't write it down. I like journaling anyway. Write it down, because you will see a pattern.
Awesome. Beautiful. So you hear that, everyone, write it down, review your past relationships. I'm excited for that. And Jenny, where can people find you? Where would you like to send them to?
Please, if you're on Facebook, of course, come to my Facebook group, and it's totally for free. It's called Strong Heart Awakening, Transform Your Relationships. Of course, drop in strongheartawakening.com. That's my webpage. Just contact me.
Awesome. And I'm sure we will have Jenny back soon again. Jenny, thank you so much for being with us.